Hello, welcome everybody to episode 2 of Spotlights and Encores with Tim and Brad. Thank you very much for joining us today. The beginning of our show, we like to cover a spotlight topic, something that is new, informational, maybe an artist that we love, or at some point we'll have some interviews at the spotlight portion. But today, we've got to spend some time talking about something that is very exciting and has been important to the work of the Dynamite Collective for the past few months and really helped us start the entire project, and that is the books that we have available on the dynamitecollective.com. And if you tuned into the last show, you'll know that this is where things started for us. We had music that Brad and I both had created together and put that up available on the site, CDs and albums. But then also Brad had just written a book, and that was the beginning of the products that we had on the Dynamite Collective. And so this was the start of it. And if you had a chance to read it, we'd love to hear some of your feedback and reviews. We've just enabled the ability to put that directly on the website. But Brad, The Journey to the Middle was a book that I loved reading, and I have to admit there's a part of that that just felt really personal to me because it reminded me of those late 80s and 90s, a lot of stories, about growing up in the Midwest like we did. Tell me a little bit about where the book came from and how you got started.
It was really sort of just a passion project that had been, sort of bubbling for years, and there had, been stories written, and I had written things down, and obviously done some songwriting as well. And I had not put pen to paper, and I hadn't spent the time to really sit down and start writing down things that I thought were interesting, or stories from either my childhood or my teenage years or my, time as an adult, or, even fiction. And I just, like a lot of people, maybe during COVID, I thought, this is maybe a good time to do it. We were all home and locked down, and it was sort of a perfect opportunity for me. And so the stories were really, there was no thought into which one I would write first or second or last. It was simply just became a sort of a dump of information out of my head, and what ended up in the book was just this sort of collection that I was able to work out and to edit. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's not a long read, but it was sort of, everything was picked and everything was put in its, particular place and in a particular order. And I think it turned out, pretty well. The feedback I've gotten has been pretty good since I wrote it, and I guess it would be 2021.
Well, I'll tell you, as much as I loved the ability to relate to some of those things about, again, growing up in the Midwest, I have to tell you, if you remember, my favorite story was when you took some steps into fiction writing. And so that definitely the favorite part of the book for me. But did you start working on the second book immediately? This, ladies and gentlemen, is Men of War, and released just this month. Brand new book from Brad. Was it kind of like you're filming, part one and part two in the same time, or was this a new genesis, new inspiration?
Yeah, so it was very unplanned. There was this chunk of time after the first book was finished and published that I wanted to start working on an idea. I had an idea for a children's book that came to me several years ago, and I wanted to start working on that. And then once I was able to get that rolling with an illustrator, I sort of was able to step back and let her work. And then this was, like I said, it was very unplanned. I only had one story left over from the first book that I just couldn't finish. So I started working on that, and it was just, one thing led to another, led to another, led to another. And it was just, again, sort of like songwriting. Like sometimes you get an idea and you're able to finish a song, and sometimes you can only get a verse or a chorus or something, and you set it aside and start working on something else. But, this was, it's funny because it turned out to be a bit longer than the first book, in which again was, I felt like I had a lot more material for the first, but the second one ended up being longer. And again, like you mentioned about the fiction, like there is now more fiction sort
Hmm.
of thrown in for this book, and it is less sort of tales of my time as a teenager or as a child, and there's a bit more fiction sort of intertwined with some of these stories. Some of them are absolutely 100% true, and then some of them have a little bit of fiction sort of to maybe pad the story and make it a little better.
I picked up on that. I thought, gosh, I'd never heard this story before. Something brand new, right?
Yeah.
Well, fantastic books, and they're both a great read. And a little teaser. I think you mentioned it's kind of exciting. There's another book on the way, a children's book. So we'll be back with more on that at a later date. But last but not least, this is something that we're very excited about. We've had Brad's books, and obviously he's been passionate about that writing experience. But this is really where we can begin to realize what we want to accomplish at the Dynamite Collective. Now we have 3 books from T. Willingham Publishing, and the third is written by our dear friend Eric Bennett, releasing this month. Couldn't be more excited. There was a successful Kickstarter campaign. Really, really excited about Welcome to the Election Year War by Eric Bennett. Eric's somebody we went to high school with. I immediately ran out and bought his first book. So I'm very excited to have this on the Dynamite Collective site. Brad, you were able to talk to Eric a little bit through the process of his writing. What did you guys have in common in terms of how you approach writing your books?
I think part of it, the big thing that he and I talked about was sort of motivation, right? Where are you in the story, and what has driven you to write this? What has driven you to maybe set it aside for a period of time and then pick it back up, and the desire to finish it and the desire to tell this particular story that you just needed to get in print. And so he and I spent a lot of time sort of emailing back and forth when we were working, just in anticipation of these being finished and wanting to swap them out with each other and say, okay, your turn to read mine. No, okay, now it's your turn to read mine. So he's now has a copy of mine. I now have a copy of his, and so we're both looking forward to sort of getting through them, and then having another chat after we finish.
Yeah, thank you. Couldn't be more excited. Again, now all 3 books are going to be available on the dynamitecollective.com. That's it for the spotlight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. This is Tim and Brad with the Spotlights and Encore show, and this is the time in the show when we take questions from the audience. Brad, don't you just love it if you're at a show or an event and the artist takes questions from the audience?
Never a good idea.
It's never a good idea. You never know what you're going to get into. One of the things that I've had people ask me, because we talked about, especially at the beginning of the show and the origin of the Dynamite Collective, our influence from hosting and participating in open mics. And one of the things people ask me a lot is, what happens at open mics? What are some of the stories? And there are a lot of crazy things that happen at open mics. And I know you've written about some of them, but I thought we could throw out a couple of interesting or crazy stories from our experiences. So you go first. Tell me one very crazy or funny story that you've experienced at an open mic.
So I think I'm afraid I know what you're going to say. And so I'm not going to take that one because I think I know which one you're going to tell. So really, some of it is a culmination of people wanting to play instantaneously with having no idea as far as what the other bandmates know, what key they need to play in.
Because it's a
somebody
collection
just
of musicians
gets up,
often.
yes, and wants to play a song which 1 out of 4 people in the band may know, which it's a disaster. Every single time it's a disaster. Nobody knows what's going on. Listen, we're not professional musicians, and that is probably part of the problem. But like somebody jumping up on stage and saying, let's just play Kansas City. And you're like, well, I don't know what Kansas City is. No, it's fine. You just start. It goes down and on and on and on. And so that, to me, there are several of those incidents, and they've always ended in absolute disaster and embarrassment. And the other one that I have written about that will always stick in my mind is dropping my pick in the middle of a song and stopping playing and bending over and picking it up. That was a terrible idea and one I regret. So that's it. You go.
Yeah. I don't know if the one that I'm thinking of is going to be the one that you had guessed. The story that I have is really a little different than yours in that there was an open mic that we hosted and we had a surprise guest. This was always these were always the things that I remember the most is when you're really shocked, and it could be shocked by something really bad, shocked
Mm.
by something really different. And the one time we hosted, and there was an old friend of ours from high school that showed up, and he had his gear, and we were like, we didn't really know that he was a musician at all. And he
Mm-hmm.
started setting up, and there was this amount of time where he was like tuning, and it seemed to take a really long time to him for him to set up all his gear. And I really started to think, oh man, this is not going to be good. I don't think he knows what he's doing. I think he's nervous. I'm not sure. So everybody's just waiting what seemed like forever for him to start. And he had some pretty sophisticated looping equipment, and he went forward and performed the most incredible 5 or 6 minute song, all instrumental, with this looping equipment. So he was doing his
Mm-hmm.
own background tracks live, recording them, replaying them, layering them on one or the other, and our jaws just dropped and hit the floor.
It's fantastic.
We were all in awe. And in
Yes.
that case, he was solo, right? So he didn't have to worry about anybody else messing up his show.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
amazing. I agree.
Yeah. I have a feeling we will bring back more open mic stories to this
I have
show,
more.
because those are just two really brief ones, and I've got about 4 or 5 that I'd love to share as well. But that's all the time that we have here today. So thank you all so much for joining Tim and Brad's Spotlights and Encores, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye from Portland.
Bye from Ann Arbor.